most of you will know Dr. Chris de Kock. He is the former head of the Crime Information Analysis Center of the South African Police Service. Chris has a PhD in sociology, and he has done extensive amounts of research and analysis in the crime field, as well as in looking at violent crime, which was very much a focus of his previous webinar. He also consults broadly to police forces across the region. He has worked quite extensively with us. In fact, the first time we really worked together was when we were both at the Human Sciences Research Council, and it was Chris and myself that mapped the police station precinct boundaries for the first time, which allows the crime statistics to be mapped. And more recently, a project that we have worked on together was a survey of citizen perceptions of safety in high crime areas in Gauteng. So Chris has got a very broad knowledge of crime in South Africa, statistics and data in South Africa, as well as looking at it from a research perspective. So I'm going to now just ask him if he can continue with his presentation.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. And I will now continue. First, I want to say that this whole issue of farm attacks and farm murders, and especially farm murders, is a very emotional, very sensitive topic. People usually get angry whenever you say something, whatever you say about this issue. So this is not like the previous webinar, which was more on neutral types of crimes. The reason I think why this is such an emotional topic is because a lot of us listening this afternoon, and all the people that I know have got some roots to with the farming community. Either we come from a farm, or we have friends there, we have family there, and we visit farms. So that is one of the reasons. The other reason is we talk of an older community. Many of our farmers is a bit of an older community, and some of them are very respected within their rural community, within their town, within their district. And when they get killed in such a brutal way, well, then that is a sensitive subject. Also, I think it's an emotional topic because of the levels of brutality and violence used in these attacks, in this crime, because I don't particularly like the word attack, but I'll come to that later. The fact of the matter is it is crime. But during these robberies, during these murders, a lot of brutality and a lot of violence is used. And I think that makes it also emotional, because it seems, or many people think, this is something, like terror, like terrorism. It is actually a sort of terrorism, people think. So I want to say that we should stay objective when we look at this specific crime subject. Okay. Now, right before I start with the figures and a few other issues, I want to go to dire consequences of farm attacks and murders. The first one is food security. Whenever you hear about farm attacks, you think of food security, because if we don't have farmers, we won't have food on our table. And especially now with COVID, where we are quite isolated from the rest of the world, it is not so easy to go and just import. In any case, we don't have the money to import food. So we should actually produce more food that we can use and export that food. So food security is a main issue. Also, this subject, the fact of attacks and murders on farms have a potential for conflict and violence. If you look in the past, many of the right-wing groups, even present, was stimulated by this phenomena. If we think back of 10, 20 years back, and we think of the Boeremag, for example, those people were actually motivated by farm attacks. That is what they did. They did what they did was because of farm attacks. Then also, farm attacks is one of those crimes that have a very negative effect on brand South Africa. outside there in the greater world. We know a few years ago, the Australian reaction, I think it was the year before last, the Australian reaction on farm attacks. I mean, they saw it as genocide, and they said all the farmers must go to Australia, and that clearly damaged our image overseas, and it can have a very negative effect on, for example, tourism. Now, I mean, COVID-19 already sort of virtually destroyed our tourism, especially the hunting, the wildlife, and the wine tourism. Those all occur on farms. So, so if we have lots of these attacks, people may just not come and visit us after COVID-19 and our borders are opening up again. Then I think one of the most important consequences, especially on a farm which is very labor intensive and there's a lot of people employed on the farm, is that those people lose their jobs. Sometimes that farm, the children don't want to go and farm, the farm gets sold, the farm are now used for some other purpose, and people just don't have the jobs that they have for the last 30 years or whatever the case may be. Now, what is the possible motives for farm attacks? And this is based basically on analysis over many years. There were quite a few investigations, not by the police, but by, for example, the Human Rights Commission. There was a commission on farm attacks in the late 90s, appointed by then President Mandela. And they did research, they did analysis, and they looked at all the probable motives. And I think even today, we agree that for now, up to now, robbery is the main motive. And I'm actually talking of aggravated robbery, but I just call it robbery because it may not be so aggravated. But in the case of farms, it is always aggravated. So it's armed robbery and a lot of violence. Now, the reason why farms are targeted is because farms are far, the homesteads are far from each other. Even on one farm, you may find 1 or 2 homesteads, 3 homesteads, but they are usually a few kilometers or a kilometer apart. And so when they surprise the people there, the residents, there's no chance that your neighbor will hear. Your neighbor is just too far away, even if there's gunshots or gunfire. There's an absolute belief amongst these farm attackers. I mean, they were interviewed, some of them, but there is a perception, even with ordinary people have this perception that, point number one, farmers must have a lot of firearms locked up in a safe somewhere. Actually, there's even certain firearms that farmers had in the past. I think it's still the case, which is semi-automatic firearms, which cannot be obtained by any person except CIT companies and so on. But semi-automatic firearms in the past couldn't be obtained by ordinary citizens. So there's firearms, lots of firearms, and there's cash. They believe farmers keep cash in their safes with the firearms because they sell animals, they sell other products, and so there must be cash. And cash, unfortunately, is that thing which always draws attention of our criminals. Even in business robberies, they will strike the businesses which are cash-based, not the business which are not cash-based. Also, farms are it's very expensive and difficult to secure homesteads on farms. It's not like, you know, I live here in a townhouse complex, and even I find it difficult. I thought after the last weekend, there was attempted housebreaking here, even if I thought that my security is 100%. But here it's easy. In the city, it's easy. You have neighbors which, in a sense, protect you, and you can only look maybe at your front of your house to put in expensive security, because at the back and the sides you are already covered. On a farm, you have to put in a lot of money, invest a lot of money in security, and then even then, security, there's always vulnerability to security. And we see many of these farm attacks occur, especially when farmers come from, say, an evening out, a Saturday evening out, or a Friday evening out. They come back to home, and when they enter the periphery, the security periphery, that is when these guys strike. Before they can close it. Or they come back from Sunday church, and that is exactly when these attacks occur. Robbery side is that, you know, our farmers is a elderly population, most of them. And there's young farmers, many of them, but a lot of them, if we look at those that gets attacked, there's clearly a bias towards your older farmers. It is usually people in their 60s, late 60s, early 70s, or even 80s. And those people are very vulnerable because they are older. And unfortunately, also older people, and I've got quite a lot of knowledge of that in my surroundings, don't always think that security is necessary. They live on this farm for the last 50, 60 years, and well, nothing ever happened, so it won't happen to them. And that is a very unfortunate situation. Also, they may not have the money to invest in that expensive security measures. Now, there's a few cases, and I think it's actually the minimum cases, where the motive may be where a farm worker or an ex-farm worker is involved in the robbery or in the attack, and there it may be labor disputes, bad treatment in the past, bad treatment of family in the past. That may play a minor role, but not in all attacks. It's actually the minority. Then the whole idea that there's an orchestrated action to chase white farmers from their land, and there's even the idea that this is genocide. Well, I have never seen any signs of that in the data in front of me, the data that I have. I don't think at this stage there's any orchestrated action to chase white farmers from the land or genocide. Okay, sometimes it looked like a farm attack and murder, but later it is found that there are other motives, like the Griqua Stad, the very, very well known. There's now even a movie on the Griqua Stad murders, where the son then murdered the father, the mother, and his sister. Now that case is not the only case. I'm aware of quite a few cases where the motive was some internal motive. And there may even be cases currently under investigation. Now, if we look at figures of farm attacks, it's actually very interesting if we have a long view back to farm attacks. Basically, I start with this table in 1998 to 1999, that financial year. In that year, we had 153 farm murders. I didn't include the tax here. I'll come to the tax later. But 153 farm murders in 98. These are all police statistics. 153, 98, 99. And last year, 2019-20, we had 49. And if you look at it, the trend is always downward. In the late 90s, it was above 100, and it stayed above 100 until 2002-03. Then it went below 100, and it stays in the 80s for quite a few years. And then it went down to 70 in 1 year. That was 10-11, the World Cup year. And then in 11-12, it went down to 56. And then to 60, 58, it stayed on the same level, and it stayed on that level till 2018. And then in the last 2 years, it went below the 50 per annum. Now, you will see I have a figure there with lots of question marks, and I said 36 for this year, saying that maybe this year we will go below the 40. But this morning, just an hour ago, while my power was off, I heard something on Radio 702 that somehow or other, and I could not hear. I was a little bit late. I was somewhere, and then I heard it, and I was rushing towards the radio. And there was some figure which was released just this hour or two ago of 30, that 30 people on farms were killed in June alone. In June alone. But then there must be a problem. Either that statistics is not correct, or the police statistics, the quarterly statistics, which was just released a few weeks ago, is incorrect. Because the figures released a week ago, and that's how I calculated my 36 in a very rough and tumble way. The figures which was released for April, May, and June, the first quarter, and this was our first quarterly release, the police first quarterly release, which I'm very glad about. But for that figure is only 9, and that is for April, May, and June. Now, according to this figures that was released, it seems it's the TLU South Africa, but I may be wrong. It may be the other agricultural organization, another one. But they release a figure for 30 people killed in June alone. Now, there's a big difference between 30 and 9 people. So I think we'll have to sort out this after this webinar and in the next few days. What is the real figure? If it's 30, then I'm extremely worried. Then we may see a figure which will go back to the 153 and even higher than that. And then we will be in a big crisis because then it really becomes a crisis. But in all probability, we will see. We will see what will happen. I've already spent some time on this, but I may refer to one other thing, which was also referred to in the debate on Tuesday. There was a special debate in Parliament on Tuesday, and parliamentarians, I listened to lots of their speeches and read some of their speeches, and it seems there was some reference again to what I, in the past, have said to the Human Rights Commission in the hearings that they had, that there is always reference to a certain highly questionable ratio. And this ratio says something like this. This ratio is deep in the hundreds. It is something like 160, 170, and it also sometimes differ a little bit. But the fact of the matter is it is then used to say that a farmer's job is much more dangerous even than a policeman's or a police officer's, not the men, but the police officer's job. Now, this is highly questionable, and I will show you why I say so. On the next slide, we see that if we take the 49 of 2019 and 2020, that financial year, which was released about a month, 6 weeks ago, those figures were, that figure which was mentioned there was 49. So you'll see in the table that I've put in on the numerator, the number of murders, I've put in 49 on all of those different columns. There is 7 columns altogether. Then as a denominator, the farming community. I have to put the farming community as the denominator. Now you should remember, when we refer to farm murders and when we refer to farm attacks, we include small holdings. About a half of our farm murders occur on small holdings. So about half of that 49, say 25 or 24 of those occur on small holdings. Now, I'm questioning if all small holdings are used for agricultural purposes. Many of our small holdings are just for people who don't want to live in cities. They live just on the periphery of the city on a plot, on a small holding. So that's already a problem. Now, that very high ratio of 163.3, I've done my own calculations. I've taken the 49 and I've divided it by a figure of 30,000 because was calculated on the registered commercial farmers. On registered commercial farmers. Many years ago it was calculated. And I've recalculated it because now the murders is about 49. And and I come to a ratio of 163.3. Now, that's a very high ratio. And that is much, much higher than police killings, and it's much, much higher than the murder in our population. But the problem, and that's my main concern, is we can't just divide by 30,000, because we can't, I mean, the farmer must have a family. So you are a registered farmer, but you have a family of at least 2 or 3 people. Then you come to 90,000, which immediately takes that ratio down to 54.4, which is still high, higher than the general population, and so on. But you must remember the definition of farm attacks and the definition of farm murders is it include also the people working on the farm, the workers that stay on the farm, include those people, plus their families, their children, their grandparents, and whatever other people who are staying with them on that farm. And it also includes visitors. If the farmer have visitors, and if it is a farm which is a holiday farm, you know, this is an in thing these days, you get the bed and breakfasts on holiday farms, then it will also include the visitors. Now, then we are going to 120,000 or maybe even 240,000. And then, if it is 120,000, you will see that the ratio becomes 40.8, which is just above the national ratio, just above the national ratio, and just above the police killing ratio, because the police killing ratio is the same as the national. And if you go to 240,000 farming population, which I don't think is unrealistic, you fell below the national ratio for murders, which means that it is actually not the most dangerous job at all. Some of us have more dangerous job. Just to finish this thing of ratio off, as we find here that I worked out South Africa's murder ratio at this stage last year for the last financial year, and based on that population, the mid-year estimate was 36.3 per 100,000. The SAPS murder ratio was 37.4, which means, but that is now the total police service, the whole police service, all the members. And not all police service are in the streets. You may get a different figure when you only work with those which are in the street, which are operational, the ones sitting in office. But those sitting in office also become victims of murder. Also, those in the police station. We have seen police stations attacked in the past years. Now, farm murder ratio, and I have a question mark there because I see previous slide. I don't believe it is much higher than the general population. I think it is just in line with the general population, especially if we remember that farm murders are actually murders on small holdings, and that on many farms there are various housing units which are sometimes also rented out by people from the nearest town. So it's not always farmers killed on the farm, it may be other people living on the farm. Now, the concept of farm attacks, there's a definition which was formulated in the 90s, in the late 90s, after the summit of President Mandela. There was a special safety summit on farm attacks because of that very high figure that you see there right at the beginning. It was even higher than that before that year, but I unfortunately don't have those figures. There was a crisis, and there was a summit over the weekend, and then it was decided that all the intelligence services, crime intelligence, the military intelligence, and the then national intelligence will formulate a definition. And in that definition, they included that it should be all people living on farms and small holdings, all people working on those, and so on and so forth, and visitors to those premises, and so on. They've included that most of these attacks are actually robberies, and most of them will be one of the trio crime robberies. It will be house robbery if the farmer is attacked in his house, he and his family. It will be, or even a worker on the farm or a manager on the farm is attacked in his home, he and his family. It will be a business robbery if it is on the premises of the farm, say at the dairy or at the winery or at any place where people work in a building or so. Then it will be business robbery if the person is attacked on the farm. And then it will sometimes be hijacking. People may be hijacked as they enter the farm, as they enter the gates of the farm. Now, it will be one of those. Now, what I did is I looked at farm attacks, because the police doesn't release farm attacks anymore. I mean, in both the recent two releases, both the annual and the quarterly, there were no figures for farm attacks. But what I did is I looked at that very old figures and I worked out the average, and it is about, and I think most agricultural unions will agree with me, that it is about 742, 750 per year. Now, if you take that, then trio crimes is, then this is only about 1.2% of true crimes. I think I didn't refer to the fact that of the murders, this is less than 3%. Our farm murders, the 49 that we had last year, is less than 3.3%. And of the attacks as a percentage of the true crimes is about 1.2%. Now, why am I saying this? I think that we can have a much better debate on murder. And murder is a problem. I mean, let's face it, murder is South Africa's main problem for me. Other people might say there's other main issues. But I think we are in a pretty dire strait when it comes to murders. We are, one of these days, we may be the #1 in the world. And the fact of the matter is, we will have to look at murders. And I, for example, earlier this week said that I think that the debate that was in Parliament on Tuesday, I think it was Tuesday afternoon, which was actually quite a hectic debate, that debate would have been more rational to me if we could talk about all murders. And one of our biggest problems is we know about farm murders, which is 49 for now. Maybe this year it will look much worse if that 30 is correct, which I've heard about an hour ago. But we talk about murders, and we know there's farm murders. We know there's GBV, that is gender-based violence, femicide. It's now a new concept, GBV-F. Femicide, where the intimate partner kills the other partner. And we have figures there, but that figures is also a bit of thumbs up, because we use domestic violence figures, which is clearly not equal to GBV. GBV is something different from domestic violence. Domestic violence, many domestic violence is father on child, and child on parents, those type of things. And that's not GBV. But the fact of the matter is, the only figures that we have of murders is police members, murders of police members, and murders of farmers. Now, and which is not also clearly not all farmers. So what we need is that when a murder is registered, the investigating officer or the person who registered, or then after a few hours, the investigating officer should decide that, look, I have got 10 theories here, but I think this is a farm attack. To me, just now look at a farm attack. Mr. So-and-so and his wife of 70 years were killed in Wolmaranstad on Friday evening during what was seen as a robbery. So I'm going to register this for now as a farm attack. Later, I may find out it was a hit or it was something else. But that's not the issue now. Let's register crimes. And then when you have a street robbery, somebody is found in the street and he was shot with a firearm, and clearly his cell phone is gone, his wallet is gone, and whatever, you register that as a street robbery. And clearly, if somebody is hijacked in their car and they're killed in the process, well, that's a robbery as a result of carjacking. Taxi violence would be quite easy. Gang violence is quite easy to register that as this murder is a result of gang violence, but there may be a question mark. And later investigation may show that this was actually nonsense. The police just use it as an excuse for some accident. They shot bullets and somebody was hit, and now they say, oh no, but this is a crossfire with a gang. But that will only be later. But for purposes of fighting this scourge of murder, we need to know exactly what is our segments. And then, because each segment will have a different strategy. Farm attacks or farm murders, let me rather prefer to farm murders and not farm attacks. They will be having a strategy. There must be a specific strategy there, but there will be another strategy when it comes to taxi murders, and another strategy when it comes to vigilante murders and GBV and all the rest. Okay. Then also, I think it can help, although the figure is small, but I think what can help is if these attacks are at least not only the murders, but the attacks are geo-mapped. It's mapped on a map, and we can then see where there is some concentrations. If I just look at the newspapers, and especially one newspaper which report quite frequently on farm attacks, I must say, I think that we will find that the biggest concentration will be in the periphery of our biggest cities. Places like Muldersdrift, Kameeldrift, just to mention two, there's many others where you have the small holdings, and those are very dangerous areas actually for murders. And I think this, if we have the full categories, all the categories, I think it will help a lot to prevent further politicization of the issue. Because the problem with farm attacks is it is highly politicized at this stage. And I think that is actually counterproductive. It may be that is actually opening a lot of debates, which is unnecessary in a country, in a very deeply divided society like South Africa. And I think it's time for questions.
Statistics on the convictions or arrests in terms of these farm attacks or murders or whatever you want to call them.
No, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. No, I don't have specific figures, but if I, especially, if you look at the Beeld newspaper, I think they have quite a good record of reporting on farm attacks and what happened afterwards. I must say, to me, it sounds that there is quite a good arrest figure. The farming community is so organized. The security companies and security guards that look after them, and the community is so organized that when the first alarm, when the alarm is made, that or a sign goes out that there was a farm attack, immediately they mobilize for districts around that specific area. And it seems that within very short period of time, they arrest people. I must also say that in the far past few months, there were also signs that crime intelligence also have a lot of information on these farm attacks, and that they immediately also help in the process of arrest. So I think the arrest amongst for farm murders and farm robberies or attacks are much, I would say, I think it will be higher than the ordinary murders that happen everywhere in our cities and in our towns. I think they are much more organized to get hold of these culprits. And I think those cases also, if you look, the Beeld also report quite regularly, daily on court cases, and it seems they get good punishment there. Thanks.
Hi, Chris. This is Jana Smith from Report newspaper. Chris, so there's a lot been said. I mean, this past week we've seen a lot of video cons, and there was also, like it was discussed in Parliament, and what I'm getting is that we are in a crisis situation from most of the people involved, Agri-SA, etc., etc. I've spoken to a lot of people, and they're seeing it as it's becoming out of hand, and it's becoming worse as we go. So from your presentation, it seems like that you don't view it as being such a dire situation. So I just want to clarify, are you also worried and thinking that it's too much, or are you thinking we are winning the fight in a sense?
You know, that's a very difficult question that you posed to me, but I will try to answer it as follows. I think it's a dire situation if we say that the criminals, that as a result of the criminals, murdering farmers, farmers is going to leave, because it is, as I said, already an elderly population, many of them. And if they stop their business, if they just decide, well, it's too unsafe, I'm going to leave the farm, I'm going to sell the farm or whatever. And that may be a major problem for fruit production, which look very good at present. It may be a problem for our economy, for job creation and all of those things. So I always are aware of the seriousness of all crime. If we just look at figures, and now there, unfortunately, an hour before this presentation, I hear that in June, there were 30 murders. This is a figure which was given on EWN Eyewitness News by 702, and they referred to the Agricultural Union and the spokesperson there who gave these figures. And if that is the case, if they in June were only were up to 30, then we are going for the bad. Then we are really going in the wrong direction. Then we are losing the battle, and then we are in deep trouble. But unfortunately, how can I believe that figure? Because the police issued a figure, and you must remember the police figures are now not only national figures. For the last year, they are official figures because they now comply to the SASQAF, the criteria of SASQAF, the South African Quality Control Framework, whatever. The fact of the matter is they release a figure of 9 for 3 months, for April, May, and June. So what I'm saying is, if I look at the figures, just at the figures, and I trust the police figures, say I trust the police figures, I accept it as correct. For me, it doesn't seem there's a crisis. The debate on Tuesday, was that there was, after lockdown, there was a massive increase in farm attacks and in farm murders. It seems that was the motive for that debate. But 9 is actually lower than 2 previous years' figures. They compare it in the release that they had a few weeks ago of the quarterly figures. So if I look at my table somewhere in this presentation, over the years from 1998 down to 1920, I look at the quarterly figures. I don't see a crisis in the figures. I actually see that things are improving. But the consequences, well, that's a different issue. And that makes me I always worry, because it damaged South Africa. Every murder damaged South Africa, and farm murders will clearly have an impact on a certain part of our tourism, for example.
Sure, thank you.
The level of violence in our society is disastrous. That's the bottom line. Whether it be a farm attack, a farm murder, a woman killed in a township, or somebody robbed and then murdered within a residential area, it's a disastrous situation. And what we need to be doing, and I think that this is what you really are pointing to, is that in order for us to fully understand what is happening, the information must be made available to the extent that we have a balance in our understanding of what is happening. On the one hand, you've got the